Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Bonfire Buddies. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I've also stamped another piece with a few more of those stumps. And I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with my moose, and for him I chose some E20s. I went with E21, E23, E25, and E27. Starting with my darkest shade, which is the E27, and laying in some shadows down the back of his body. I'm also going to add a little bit to his arm that's kind of sticking out of his jacket right before the hoof. And then underneath his jacket, I'll cast a little shadow, and then down the back of his legs. Then I'm going to take that E25 and to begin to pull that color out by going over the edge of the E27 and just pulling a bit of that darker color into the white space there, kind of transitioning from shade to shade. I'm going to bring that out on his legs as well and bring that down on his tail. And then I'll switch to the E23. The E23 is going to be my lightest shade for most of his body, but I'm going to leave some room for the E21 on his face. I like to keep the face nice and light so you can really see those features. So I just created like a little circular area around his eye. And then I'm coming in with that E21 and filling that in, and also carrying that into his muzzle and to the inside of his ear. I'll add a tiny touch on his tail, transitioning to the white area, and then just kind of work my way up his antlers, adding some shadow to the back of those. So now my lightest shade is becoming my darkest for his antlers. And then I'll bring in the E000 to finish those out. Just blend that to be a little bit softer. While I have those shades out, I'm also going to use the E21 and the E000 to do my marshmallows. Just adding a little bit of shading to those with the E21 and then blending out with the E000. And I'll do a little bit more to the roasted marshmallows, the one they're working on. So I did come in with a little bit of the E23 and blended that back out again. I'm doing it on the bottom side for the bunny, but on the top side for the moose, just to give it a different look. So he's already turned his, he's got the nice golden brown that he wants, and he's got it turning it to toast the underside. And then I did add a few dots with the E25 as well to just give it a little bit more of a brown look. And I'm going to color the inside of the guitar with the E21 and E000. And then I'll use all three of the darker shades for the outer part of the guitar. So I started again with the E27 and I put that on the underside of the guitar. I'm blending up toward the top, then with the E25, and now I'm using that E23, just bringing that up even further. So I am actually going to squeeze in 4 shades. I'm going to use that E21 as well to fill in the rest of the guitar that's right under the bear's arm, and also the top part there as well. Then I'm going to move over to the bear, and I wanted to do a black bear, so I'm using my toner grays. I went with T1, T3, T5, and T7. So again, I'm using that T7 to lay in my shadows, and since this bear is facing toward the left, I'm going to put my shadows down the right side of his body, down the back. Number one, because I like to keep their faces as light as possible, but also because the fire there is going to be my light source on this card. So it's going to be between everybody. So their faces would be the lightest part of their bodies. So once I have the T7 laid in, I'm going to bring in the T5 and begin to blend that out. Again, making sure to kind of color over the very edge of the previous shade, not over it completely, but just the very edge of it, so it kind of drags that darker color into this lighter shade. this lighter version of that color tone. And then I'm going to come in with the T3 and bring that in. And just like with the mousse, the T3 is going to be my lightest shade for most of the bear's body. And I'm just leaving that area on the face for that lightest shade, and that's going to be the T1. So I'll bring that in next, and you can see I'm kind of doing little circular motions. This kind of helps break up the previous shade and transition to the next. I'm going to leave his muzzle white for now. In the meantime, I'm going to go and do the mousse's hooves with the T7 and then the T5, and then I'll use the T3 for the lightest on those. And I will also do the stones, but this time I'm going to start with the T5. I wanted them to be a little bit lighter. So adding the T5 first, blending out with the T3, and then using the T1 for the highlight. For the bunny, I'm going to go back to my E000, but I'm going to add in the E30 and E31. Starting with the E31, I'm going to add his shadows down the back of his body and also under the edge of his sweater. And then I'll blend that out with the E30. And I'm going to add some extra detail to him in just a little bit, just for something fun. That's one of the things I love about coloring bunnies. But first I'm going to bring in that E000 and bring that up more on his face. I'm also going to use these 3 shades to color in my black bear's muzzle. So I just started with the E31 on the underside, and then I'm working up toward the highlight on the top. Once I have that done, I'm going to pull in the E33 to darken up this combo a bit. And I'm going to add some little details to my bunny. I'm going to give him a ring around one eye, and then a brown ear, and then some spots on the other ear, and some spots down his little back on his bum. And I'm using the E33 and the E31 for those. Then I'll bring in R11 and R20 to give everybody some rosy cheeks and add a little bit of color to the insides of the ears. So I use the R20 first, and then I'm going around that with the R11, blending out the ears. For the bunny, because he's so much lighter than the other two, I did need to soften that even further, so I brought in R000 and blended out his cheek and his ears with that, and then used the R20 to fill in his nose. And then I'm going to do some more brown tones. These are the E70s. They have a lot of gray tone in them, so they're kind of like a grayish. And I thought that would be nice for some weathered wood. It would just give the wood a different look, because I didn't want anything that would be too similar to the mousse or the bunny. So this looks like wood that's been cut and sitting out for some time in the weather, which is really what I wanted. I went the whole range. I went with E70, E71, E74, E77, and E79. So I'm starting with the E79 and laying in some shadows, and then a few strokes to kind of just define the different heights of the wood, because it's not all completely smooth. You know, there's dips and folds in tree bark. So I'm just kind of creating some texture with those darker shades, blending out with the E77 and then the E74, and then finally the E71 for the outside part of the bark. And then for the cut edge, I'm going to use the E71 as the lightest and fill in with the E70. And I did all 4 of the extra, or is it 3, on the separate sheet. I did all of those with the same shades off camera. I'm also going to use just the E77 and the E74 to do the marshmallow sticks that the mousse and the bunny are holding. Next, I'm going to work on the flames of my campfire. So I'm starting with Y02, YR21, YR23, and YR27. I wanted those rich fall shades of the YR20s, but I also wanted to warm it up a bit, so that's why I pulled in the Y02 as well. I'm going to do the first two sections of that. So I didn't use the YR27 on the first area, but now in this middle part, I did add in the YR27 to just deepen it up and give it a bit more richness. And then for the outer part, I wanted it to have a bit more red in it. And I ended up going with R17. R17 is a pretty warm red, so I thought it might blend okay with the YR27. Although I think the YR27 was actually maybe a little bit too dark. It kind of overtook a lot of the R17. So I blended it out then with the YR23. I do think it worked okay, but I would probably maybe just try blending out with the YR23 or pick a different shade next time, because I don't know that those two shades really did a lot for each other. But like I said, I just made it work. I did have to go back and add in a little of the R17 again because I wanted more of that red tone. And then I'm going to use the YR04 instead to blend that out. And because that's a brighter orange, it just helped with that transition a bit more. And then I'll go in with the YR21 to blend that back out again. Next, I'm going to bring in some blue tones. I'm using B41, B45, and B97. I wanted something that would match with the B41 and the B45 that had kind of that dustier tone to it. So I decided to pull in the B97, and I do think it worked pretty nicely. I never used that combo before, but I think it worked well. So I'm blending out the B97 with the B45, like I said, just creating those shadowed areas in the crease of the elbow or where the arm is overlapping the body, at the hem of the jacket and the back of the neck, because we have those big antlers casting a shadow down the back, plus it's away from the fire. And then using that B41 for the highlight shade. And then while I have these blues out, I also decided to use them for the marshmallow bag. And first I wanted to kind of highlight the kind of swoop of the area where it says marshmallows. It's kind of written in a semicircle kind of pattern, so I wanted to follow that. But I ended up using the B41 for the white parts, and it was too dark, so you couldn't really see that transition as well. So I kind of wish I had used a lighter shade, because I don't know if you kind of see that delineation of that swoop part, but it's fine. Then I use some red tones for the bunny's sweater, so I wanted to use that R17 again to pull that color in on another part of the card. So I'm using that with the R14 and then the R27, which I have in the Chow. That's one of the first Copic markers I ever bought. I bought a handful of Chows at a Hobby Lobby in another city on vacation, and I quickly fell in love with them and switched to the sketch markers and never looked back. So that Chow marker is at least 11 years old, maybe close to 12 now. But anyway, I am going to use that to color in my graham cracker box because I like to have pops of color here and there that kind of echo each other on the scene. I'll use G46 to just flick in a little bit of color where the grasses are, just following the artist drawn lines. And then I am going to grab a black Sakura Jelly Roll marker and go over the eyes of my critters. This kind of just adds a little bit of shine to them, makes them black and prominent because they kind of get a little dulled by the Copic coloring. So this just brings them back to life. And then I wanted to add a bit of detail to the bunny's sweater. So I'm going to start with R39. And I'm just going to do a simple plaid. So I'm doing some diagonal stripes in one direction, and then I'm going to switch and go from the opposite. So I started at the top right and went toward the bottom left, and now I'm going to from the bottom right to the top left. And you could definitely leave it just like that, but I'm going to also add some white plaid in there as well. So I'm just kind of going in between the darker red lines and adding in some white lines in that same diagonal pattern, and then switching and going the opposite direction to create that plaid look. So once I'm done with that, I am going to trim all of these images out with their coordinating dies. So next I'm going to take a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock and die cut that using the campsite scene from Hello Bluebird. And you can see that off to the side there. I just left it intact on my plate so that I can pick out the pieces that I want to work with one at a time. So the first things I'm going to do are the ground, and I am going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks. For the ground, I'm starting with some antique linen in the center. This is going to be where my campfire is, so I want it to be light because the campfire would be casting a little bit of a glow around itself. And then I'm going to darken it up around the edges with some gathered twigs. So I'm just blending that on from the outer edges, leaving that center light. And then I wanted to add a little bit to this extra piece. This is also the ground that you will see kind of between the trees. I'm going to blend out the transition, going back to my first ink blending tool. And then I want to darken this up a bit. So I'm going to add in some vintage photo as well. So again, just coming in from the outer edges. So we've got some shadows kind of creeping in. I want this to be a night scene, but not too dark because I'm not going to have like really heavy shadows on this card. So they've pretty much started the fire right as it started to get dark. So that way we can still have some vibrant color in this scene. I'm going to set those pieces off to the side and then pull out the next pieces. I have a tree that I'm also going to do with some browns. So while I have those colors out, I'm going to go back to the vintage photo and just darken this piece up, giving it a bit of texture. And then I'm going to make that even darker and give it some definition using some ground espresso Distress Oxide ink. And I left that lighter at the bottom because that would be where the campfire would be kind of casting a glow there as well. Next, I'm going to work on the mountains in the distance, and I'm using some pumice stone Distress Oxide ink for those. I'm putting on that color a bit darker down at the bottom edge and then letting it fade towards a tiny bit of white cardstock at the top just to make sure that those also have some definition. And then for the snow caps, I'm going to use some speckled egg, and I'm just going to blend that down at the bottom and then leave the top white so it has a little bit of a frosty glow. But I chose a speckled egg because it's kind of like a smoky blue, and so I thought that it would be fitting for this night scene, and especially because those mountains are kind of in the distance, I didn't want the color to be too vibrant back there. Next, I'm going to work on the grass and the bushes and the trees, and I'm going to use several greens for these, but I'm starting with some Twisted Citron, especially in the areas where that flame would be, kind of casting some light there to make it just a little bit more golden toned, yellow toned, and vibrant. But then I'm going to deepen that up using some mowed lawn. And I haven't put any color on the trees yet. I'm going to make those a little bit darker than the grass and the bushes. But there is that tiny little piece of grass that's kind of attached to that one tree. So I'm making sure to add a little bit of color to that. It's just a tiny sliver there. So then I'm going to darken that up even further. I want to bring in some Rustic Wilderness. I'm going to add that to the bushes to give them a bit more definition, and then also to the grasses. And what I do to make sure that I know which piece is what is I always keep the die facing up next to me so that I can clearly see where the pieces fit, and also keeping them as much intact as possible on my cutting mat next to me also helps me know where those pieces come from as I take each section out. I'm also going to pounce that color onto my trees, and then I'm going to bring in some pine needles for those as well, and I'm just going to add a little bit of that to give them some definition at the top. Next I have the sky, and I'm going to do a little bit of like a dusty blue that's going to kind of match the blue that I used on the moose's jacket, starting with some stormy sky. That's going to be at the bottom edge, and then I'm going to darken that up with some chipped sapphire at the top. And you could definitely cut this out of colored cardstock if you didn't want to do all this ink blending, but I actually find it kind of fun and relaxing, so I didn't mind at all. So I've created a card base that is 5 1/4 by 5 1/4, which is the same size as this die. And I've scored that and folded it so that it has a top fold. And I'm taking the white frame, that's the Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, so it's just slightly off-white, but I think it suits the scene. And just gluing that to the outer edges so that I can kind of build up the scene. It really works like a puzzle. So adding that frame piece that kind of encapsulates everything is almost like when you do the edges of your puzzle first and kind of build in from there. It just kind of gives you a structure to know where your pieces go and to hold everything together. So I've got my sky in, including that little bit, and it was real easy because it just goes flush to the left-hand side. And then in that little gap, I'm going to slide my tree and just make sure that the branches on the left meet the edge on the left, that frame, and that way all the pieces that need to fit in between there are going to go in smoothly. So next I have my snow-capped mountains, and again, it looks kind of confusing when you're looking at all the pieces, but once you start to fit them together, you see it really is easy to assemble. Everything goes in its place without any confusion. Like, it just fits in one place and that's it, and so it just makes it very easy to assemble. So even this little bit here that has the cutout that goes around the tree, it's no problem at all. It fits perfectly. So it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just, this is kind of like a relaxing card to put together. I love the Copic coloring process. I find very relaxing and therapeutic. I also find the same for the ink blending, and then putting together these scenes in this kind of puzzle format is also just very relaxing and chill for me. So this is a super fun card to kind of build. I'm working on the mountains next, and again, they just slide in perfectly into the snow caps, and you can already see where the trees are going to go next. So I'm not going to worry too much about the section on the very left hand. Those are the most fiddly bits, but they're still easy to fit together once you have everything else in place. So I'm just going to leave those to the end. But next I have the ground, and I'm just fitting that around that tree branch on the bottom right, and then making sure that the flat edge is flat with the bottom of the card. And this is the section where I started to put in the sections on the left and then realized it didn't quite fit, and that's because I was missing a piece and didn't realize it quite yet. So I just recommend leaving that left-hand side blank until the end, and then you'll quickly see from the other pieces where those tiny pieces fit. So instead, I'm going to go back to the bigger chunks. I'm going to do the bushes because those are nice and big. They're going to fill in a lot of the scene as well. And it just makes you realize, again, where those smaller bits go. It just gives that framework. So then I'm going to work on my trees, and again, they're all 3 different sized, so they fit in perfectly, and they only go in one spot. There's no confusion about where they go. So I'm going to just grab one and stick it in when I see where it goes. And then this one kind of overlaps into the one on its right. So again, just perfect fit. And there is that tiny little piece that goes between them, but again, it's really not difficult. You can see exactly where it needs to go once you have the bigger pieces laid in. So I do recommend starting with the biggest pieces first after you've got your framework in place. And again, now I'm moving on to the grasses, and they all just fit perfectly. It's just really like building a puzzle. I don't know how to describe it, but it's really simple to put together. Don't let these dies intimidate you at all, because they are really fun. So now I've got everything filled in except for this left-hand side, which has the smaller little fiddly bits, but again, very easy to put together. So I'm going to start with the mountain because I know that it only goes to that tree branch, and that makes it clear exactly where that snow cap should go. So I'm just going to fit those two pieces together. Then I can clearly see from the section of the right of the tree that there was more mountain to fill in, so that's obviously where that goes. Next is the grass, and I did have it upside down at first, but it was easy to spot that it was upside down, so I just flipped that around. And then you can see that there is a sliver of grass that goes below that tree branch. And now this brown piece of the ground is going to fit in perfectly once I have that little grass piece in place. So very, very simple to put together. Now I'm going to pop this whole card front in my MISTI so I can stamp my sentiment, and I'm using one from the Frosty Mornings stamp set that says "Sending Warm Hugs." And I got a little bit too much ink on my MISTI door, so I just cleaned that up using my Lawn Fawn stamp chamois. I'm stamping that down in VersaFine Onyx Black ink twice to make sure it's nice and bold. And then I'm going to open up that card base. It is a craft card base from Lawn Fawn, and I'm going to stamp on the inside using walnut ink. I'm using another image from the Bonfire Buddies, the little owl with the marshmallow, and then the sentiment is also from Frosty Mornings. So now I'm ready to bring in my images and start staging this scene, and just like I usually do, I'm going to lay out a few of my images to kind of get an idea where I want them to go first, because the glue that I use dries very quickly, so I really need to kind of have the placement of things figured out before I start fooling around. So one of those tree branches, the bottom right one, got a little bit discolored. I think I had a little bit of glue on my finger and the moisture kind of reacted with the Distress Oxides. So I'm going to make sure that I cover that up with my mousse so it's not so noticeable. But on the right hand side around the fire, I'm going to place this larger log, and I'll have my black bear sitting on that and playing guitar. And then I'll have the campfire in the center. Next, I'm going to glue down the moose's stump. And like I said, just kind of shift it a little bit more to the left so that the moose is going to cover up that discolored branch a bit. That also helps put his marshmallow like right over the campfire, which is kind of perfect. So he's kind of leaning over the edge and getting close to those flames so he can get the perfect toast on his marshmallow. And then I'll have this shorter stump on the right hand side, the lower right, and that's going to be where all their s'mores goodies are. So I'll have that box of graham crackers and then the bag of marshmallows, and I wanted that to look like it's kind of spilling down over the edge, so I kind of tilted that down toward the ground a little bit. And then to balance that out on the left hand side, I'm going to have the last stump with my little bunny roasting his marshmallow, which is going to go right near the flame as well. So now that I've got all of my main images adhered, I'm going to start to add in my little accessory images and fill in the rest of this scene. So I have a stone with some grasses. I'm going to use that to kind of anchor that big log that the black bear is sitting on. And then I have another small stone that I put down in front of the bunny's stump. I have another little strip of grass that I'm going to put down in front of the stump where all their goodies are. And then underneath the marshmallow bag, I'm going to add that little trio of marshmallows. So that looks like it's kind of spilled out onto the ground. And then I kind of played around with the placement of the single marshmallow, but ended up deciding to put it in front of the grass. So I'm just going to put that over on the right. And then I have those little music notes, and I wanted that to be kind of coming up from the Black Bear's guitar and kind of filling in some of the space at the top of the scene. So I'm just going to make like a little arrangement of those notes so it's just kind of floating up on the night breeze. And then I wanted to add a few stars in the sky, so I'm just using a white gel pen and making sure that there are different sizes just to have a little bit of variety there. So not going too crazy, but just adding a few here and there wherever I think they look good. And then I couldn't resist just adding a little bit of glitter, so I'm going to grab some Stardust Stickles. Just added a touch of that to all of the marshmallows and a little bit to the outer edge of the fire. And then I thought it might be fun to have just a touch of it in the sky as well. So I'm going to add some extra little stars just by giving a little dab of that glitter glue up there. So that is going to finish off this card. I'm going to lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail and catch a little bit of that shimmer. And I'll give you another peek of the inside as well. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. All of the products I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below, and if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again soon in another video. Bye-bye.